Hey guys, welcome. My name is Dominique and I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Startup San Diego. Before we dive into today's session, I'll be providing a quick orientation. Today's session will be 30 minutes with 15 minutes of Q&A, then networking. The last 15 minutes of today's session will be jumping into a cocktail party one-to-one speed networking session. So you'll get the opportunity to connect with Jonathan and participants. If you're new to the platform, you can share questions or comments in the chat box on the right. And you can also react to what you're experiencing with emojis in the bottom center of your screen. Please do share with us your reactions. I'm here to serve as live support for both audience members and speakers, as well as the timekeeper. So I will be backstage for a majority of the session. I'll pop back in when it's time for Q&A, and then again to launch the cocktail party. If you need anything, just drop me a line in the chat box. If you're sharing on social, don't forget to tag at SD Startup Week and use hashtag SDSM2020. The session is being recorded and will be available a few hours after the session ends. To access, scroll to the bottom of the Run the World agenda to find the session. The Join Live button will say playback and you'll be able to rewatch all the fun. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Jonathan Cogley to kick off Growing My Startup from 0 to 100 Million Lessons Learned.
Great, thanks Dominique. I'm going to jump over and share my screen. So here we go. We can jump right through. We've got our introduction. We've got our sponsors for San Diego Startup Month. And then today. So today I'm going to be covering my startup and kind of my journey a little bit. And I've tried to pull out as best I can. As you'll see, it's kind of a 20-year span over me getting from where I was then to now. So I've tried to pull out some lessons learned. I've got to 5. So hopefully that'll give us some good nuggets. We've got 30 minutes to cover it. So feel free to put some questions in the chat as we go. And I think it's a little awkward to jump between the screens here. So we're going to cover all the questions in the 15 minutes that we have assigned for that. So jumping right in. So who am I? So I'm, I guess, a serial entrepreneur. It seems like once you've got the bug, you just stick with it. But I'm probably had the most success so far with my cybersecurity company, Psychotic. I'm a programmer by trade, so I have a degree in computer science, and that's what I cling to. But I think just the business side, the people, teams, all that is what really intrigues me. So I bring those skills together. My company, Psychotic, I founded while I was living on the East Coast. So I actually spent a long time in Washington, D.C., but 2 years ago, I moved to San Diego. So I'm based here now. And of course, being a serial entrepreneur, my latest venture is a startup accelerator. We're actually one of the sponsors for Startup San Diego Month, and we're Logic Boost Labs. So jumping right in, give you guys sort of a timeline. It's kind of amusing to see the evolution of the logo of my startup over the years, but we got a pretty long time span. So I started my career back in '98 as a programmer doing consulting. It was kind of the cool time to do that. If you knew HTML, you could go far. Fortunately, I knew more, so I have a background in everything from Unix to Java to all the Microsoft .NET, all that kind of stuff as well. So I was doing consulting, so kind of bouncing around in 1099 positions, helping mostly software product companies and helping them figure out difficult problems and doing that sort of work. So that was the kind of the early days, and I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2004. And of course, being an entrepreneur, one of my goals of moving to DC was, hey, can I take this consulting thing bigger? And so my first startup there was really a services startup doing consulting services as programmers. And so I hired other programmers who were maybe less entrepreneurial, but were really smart, capable programmers. And I hired them as W-2 employees, and we basically did consultant work. And so we helped different software companies. And what I learned pretty quickly running a services business is it's really hard to grow revenue. And as you grow revenue, because you're billing by the hour, you just need more people. So if you want to double your revenue, you really have to double your consulting staff. And so I was able to get the consulting services revenue up to about $1 million a year without too much difficulty, growing a small team of maybe 5 or 6 consultants. But I realized that if I wanted to get to 5, 10, 15 million in revenue and really grow this business to really make a difference and do something, it was just going to be so much people, so much responsibility, so much HR. It just didn't scale very well with the business. And so being that we're software developers, I looked at the problem. I said, well, wait, obviously if we can create a product that's going to scale a lot better. We can bring on more customers. We sell them a product. We only need to hire, a person for tech support, a person for sales here and there, and it scales a lot better with growth. So as I had some people with bench time, so they weren't on an active project, I would dabble with different products and have these folks work on different things. And of course, all the initial ones didn't work, right? We had lots of failures. But we finally landed up with a product called Secret Server in 2005. We launched it, I think, October or November of 2005. And that is actually the product, the main product that has grown, the whole business all the way through to present day. There's been a lot of acquisitions and further products in the last 5 years, but that was really the main thing that's driven all the growth. And we didn't know that it was a hit right away, but we had suspicions. We put it on the website. Back in the day, we had to write our own kind of online store. Our cart, we had to do our own credit card handling, no Stripe or anything like that. It was, a harder way to launch a product company back then. But we did all the lifting, and we put this product out there, and slowly but surely people started buying it. And it was a tough, long road from 2005 through 2010. We finally, I kept using the profits from my consulting business, and I grew that up to about $2 million in revenue over that period. $2 million a year in services revenue. And so I was probably making maybe 300,000 or something like that profit, maybe a bit more. And I wasn't pocketing that or anything. I was putting it into the product business. And so we hired, one of our developers became a full-time developer on the product. Then we hired a sales and marketing person and kind of slowly listened to customers. We started going to trade shows in 2007. So we were standing in front of a lot of Microsoft administrators. I guess I should touch on for a second what the product did. It really is designed for IT administrators to manage passwords, as ridiculous as that sounds, but it's fairly sophisticated. So you think about all the passwords that infrastructure people have, everything from maybe a Cisco router that has passwords, a Unix root password, Windows service accounts, kind of all the accounts that don't really map to people. But you still need to have them secured and keep them somewhere that you can get access to and use as necessary. And it's just a big problem, especially for your typical corporation. And the nice part is that they have budget to spend on solutions to that. So that was kind of what we were building. But anyway, so we spent a lot of time at trade shows where we were able to talk to our prospective customer and really understand what they were looking for. What were the issues that they were having in their day-to-day? And start to really understand what it's like to be in their shoes and all the challenges that they experience. And we learned a tremendous amount during that time and really refined the product. So we landed up with something that was, starting to have some traction. And hitting the 1 million mark in annual sales was a huge milestone. So that happened in 2010, and we continued with just incredible growth year on year from then on. So typically 50 to 80% growth year on year, which is phenomenal, especially as the numbers get bigger. And so by 2014, we'd done 10 million in sales for the year 2014. And I realized that it was going to be a challenge for me to keep growing the business at the same rate, because it meant I had to do 15 million in more or less new business, right? This product is enterprise software, so it kind of predated the SaaS stuff. This is earlier, before subscriptions were as popular. So you generally had to get a perpetual license and then 20% support. So when you're looking at 15 million in sales that you need in 2015, you've only got about 3 million in recurring. So you got to get 12 million in new business. And that's quite a challenge. And especially for me, I'm not a sales manager, and this is really starting to become a sales problem at that point. So one of my lessons learned, as you'll see, is knowing when to step aside, knowing when to get the right people into the mix. But I had a growth equity firm that bought a majority stake in the company in 2015. And they're Insight Venture Partners. They're based in New York City. They're absolutely phenomenal. And so they helped then grow the business, and I sort of steadily worked my way out of it. And stepped aside from CEO to CTO because it just really wasn't the thing that I wanted to be doing anymore. And things have gone incredibly well. I still sit on the board. I still hold stock in the company, but they've achieved basically a 10x increase. They've built the business from 10 million as I had it. I would have probably done about 12.5 million in 2015 if I hadn't had their help. We did hit 15 million with their help. and they only came in midway through the year, so pretty impressive. And they've steadily grown the business, anywhere from 30 to 60% in revenue every year since. And the company, I think, is now around about 500 employees. When back in 2014, we were about 50 employees, so about 10 times growth in employees and 10 times growth in revenue. So just really pretty phenomenal how that path has been so far. And I feel very fortunate that, I had just some good luck through some of the stages and a lot of great people to help me get there. So very rewarding experience and lots of good friendships and professional relationships that were made. So into the lessons learned. Try to distill 5 lessons learned from what was in effect about 15 years of a startup so far. So a little hard to do, but trying my best here. We're going to go with these particular 5. So jumping right in, first one, bootstrapping. So for those that don't know, bootstrapping is just when you don't take on venture funding and you actually try to have your business grow based on the sales it can generate. So get some sales in, that means how much you can spend, hire people based on what your revenue is. So I was able to do this. I had the very fortunate experience of having a consulting company that was generating a nice amount of profit, so I could effectively funnel this money in, but it still wasn't endless. I didn't have $1 million to spend or something like that, but I did have enough to pay for, say, one person and then try to get some more sales, and then with those sales, pay for more things, do more advertising. So one of the nice things with bootstrapping is it's just like basic business, right? It's like back of the envelope. You can, whatever income you have coming in, hey, that's what you get to spend. If you spend more than that, you're going to go bankrupt. Also, what's great about it is I never spoke to investors for probably until the last 2 years. So from 2013 on, I had a couple of conversations, but still nothing like the amount of time that your average founder speaks, does presentation decks and all that kind of stuff for investors. I didn't have to do that. And what that allowed me to do was then spend all my time either building the product, working with my team, or very importantly, speaking to customers and understanding exactly what they needed and how we needed to adjust our messaging, our pitch, our product, whatever it might be. So not saying that you obviously, you can raise money and do a great job there, but this is just a different approach. And it means you have different concerns at times too. Like no one ever said to me, well, if we give you $2 million, what would you do? And I never had to worry about that. I just had to worry about like the next step in the chain. So it's a very sort of incremental approach. And, the goal was keeping at break even. And I would even say it sort of keeps you financially honest, right? If someone gives you $2 million and you're like, I'm going to have a big sales team and I'm going to do this and this and that, and you're really just rolling the dice that you're going to get those decisions right, and that sales team is going to be able to pay for itself when the budget runs out. Otherwise, what? Go raise again, right? So it's just a different mindset. But there are downsides. It's hard, right? Because you don't have money for what you want to do, and you have to sort of penny pinch a lot. Couldn't always pay the highest salaries for certain people, so we had to compensate in other ways, which we'll get into around team culture and kind of the mission of the company. And it's also very slow. So you'll see there, we launched the product in 2005, and it took us till 2014 to get to 10 million. That's a long time, right? So perhaps we could have done it faster, with money, but maybe we would have made the wrong decisions if we'd had more funding. So kind of an interesting approach. I think there's value in penny pinching and looking very carefully at what you really need to spend in order to grow a business. So the B2B sales space, I love it. It's become the main focus for Logic Boost Labs. So we focus on startups that are B2B and are in the software space. So software is great, because like the problem I talked about with consulting and services, software just scales better. There's also often less capital involved. If you have hardware or anything like that, you can need a lot of money to do that kind of stuff, or just more challenging. Software is just a great business to be in. Obviously, you can be successful in other businesses too, but it's for me, it's always been a space that I understand and seems to work if you get the recipe right. B2B, so business to business selling. So you make a software product. These days it would be, a SaaS product, some kind of website your customer goes to, creates an account, and then uses your product to solve some problem that they have. And then they pay you probably a monthly subscription. B2B, for me at least, it's just an easier process to understand. Obviously, you can be successful with a B2C model, so selling to the consumer, Many companies do it. I think B2B is a lot easier though. There's less emotion involved in the sale. So you think about a typical stakeholder at a business, they have a problem to solve, right? They don't probably care what color it is. They don't care what their friends think about it. There's none of that sort of consumer nuance and things that you really have to think about and trends and so on. With B2B, it's a pretty transactional sale. If you can solve their problem and you're a stable enough company that you're probably not going to get them fired for choosing you, then they'll probably use your solution. And that's kind of how it works. So once you get into that and start thinking about, well, how do I be successful in B2B sales? Again, the secret is not that hard. You really just have to understand your customer. So start thinking less about technology and you just sprinkle sales and marketing on it and wow, now it sells. It's the whole way, it's the whole reverse, right? Go back to the core problem, go to the customer, make sure that you understand like who they are, what is their day-to-day like, what does a Monday morning look like for your customer, what are they worried about, what are their bonus incentives that their boss has given them. Could you maybe almost even be able to do their job? Do you understand the skills needed and what the concerns are to be able to do that? That's the sort of level you want to get to. You want to really understand their position, their community, and their industry, and the typical problems that they're experiencing. And so once you have that, they're going to give you a lot more credit when they're talking to you because now you are kind of a peer. You've spoken to enough people that they see that you appreciate their problems and you're not necessarily shoving a solution. You're just trying to understand, what matters to them. And so a lot of the best founders come from a position where they have deep expertise in the domain, right? That they really understand what that particular area is and the challenges faced there, and they see an opportunity to solve those problems. And a key thing here too is to look at, if you spend enough time talking to these customers and understanding their problems, you're in a very unique position because they don't typically talk to each other that much, right? So I'll use one of our startups as an example. They're in the public relations space and they sell software to PR agencies. So if you spend all your time talking to PR agencies, associates, and owners at those firms, you're really going to start to understand, well, what's working at this firm, what's working at that firm, what are the challenges that they're seeing, what's changing in the industry, what are their main concerns, is it hiring enough staff, is it getting enough visibility with their clients, getting good relationships with journalists. You're going to start to understand all those key pieces. They don't get to talk to each other the way that you do, right? They're not going around to other PR agencies. They might have a few roundtables or things like that. But as a salesperson or a product manager or a startup founder, you might speak to 50 PR agencies in a year. They never get to have that level of conversation with so many people. So you become a real expert in that industry. And it means that when you're chatting to the 51st PR agency, they're a lot more interested to speak to you because you have insights, right? You know what people are doing. You're not going to give up secrets, obviously, but you're going to say things like, well, I've heard that this approach is working. Really? How do people do that? And so this is really the secret to it. How can you make yourself an expert in that particular industry so that it's not really sales anymore, right? It's really just you understand what the problems are and you know the solutions to those problems. And gee, what a coincidence, the products you're building are helping solve those same problems, right? So definitely a very cool approach you can take and a much easier way to generate interest, understand your product better, and be able to get interest in the industry. So third lesson learned, looking at how to differentiate your product. And just being cheap is not a great way to differentiate, right? If you're just cheaper than the competition, what do you do when the competition lowers their price to match yours? So we generally, it's possible to differentiate on price, but it's usually not the best strategy. So we have to come up with something else. And a good example here is to look at, bottled water. It's kind of the joke, right? So we know Dasani and Evian, and we're aware of these different brands. They're selling like the most basic commodity that there could possibly be. They're selling water to you in a bottle. Yet somehow they're able to wrap a message and branding and everything around that in such a way that they're different. So if bottled water can do it, surely in complex software and B2B for your startup, we can come up with a good way to differentiate from the competition. So features, that's usually where we go next, right? Well, we'll just add more features, or we'll do different features. And features aren't a great way to differentiate because they can just be copied. So we had a competitor for years that was always kind of biting at our heels, and whatever release we put out, you could guarantee the features in that would be copied within 3 or 4 months. So we couldn't differentiate on that. So you have to go for something else. And a good approach to solving this can be to look at it from the customer's perspective. Even better, once again, talk to the customer. So every time you win a deal, you should know why. Always have the conversation, understand why you won the deal. Every time you lose the deal, same thing, right? A little harder. Sometimes the customer doesn't want to talk to you as much when they've decided not to go with you. But again, you could probably get a third party and maybe an Amazon gift card for $100 or something, and they'll have a conversation, and you might get some real ideas as to where you fell short. But very specifically, look at the way they describe your company and your product when they're either happy with you or they chose someone else. Look for the adjectives they use. Did they use sort of, oh, it's an elitist sales team, or oh, it's a really good value product, or it's very easy to use. All those types of things, right? Even those are very vague. You want to try to understand a bit more what they mean. They could also talk about the personality of your company. So, wow, it's such a fun business. I really like interacting with the people there. They could reference your support. Maybe your tech support was just really bubbly and responsive, and that struck a chord with them. Certainly in enterprise software, that would be unusual, right? So that could be a good differentiator. Also, look at who your customers are. Like, what's a typical customer? Make sure you have personas created for those customers. So, is this type of buyer, they have these characteristics, this is what they care about. And look at those different groups and see where you're selling more. Can you tailor your product to one particular customer and differentiate that way? And so this could get into, say, leaving out features. Maybe if you do less, maybe if you are just really good at this one part of the space, but you don't do the other things, people will recognize you for that, and they'll use your product because you're the standout provider for this particular thing. And so having that sort of focus might help you differentiate. Also look for intangibles. So I mentioned before, maybe usability. Usability is a great one. It's hard to quantify usability, right? You'll hear from the customer, well, it's just easier to use, or I was able to learn it quicker, or I didn't have to provide any training to our staff. Those sorts of things are great. So look for these different elements and see what it is that you can put into your product so that you can differentiate yourself in the marketplace. What I learned time and time again, every time I tried to play a competitor at their own game, so if I would try to be kind of a me too, maybe copy their approach to something or the way they were doing something, I pretty much always lost, right? They're always better at playing their game than you are. So you have to create your own game. So think about a way that you can win in that market, or how you can edge out your competitor in a particular way. And so I'll give you one story here. So one thing that landed up being a great intangible and competitive advantage for Thycotic over the years was we started really small, right? A little startup. Back in the early days, we didn't really have tech support. So if you downloaded our product as an IT admin, installed it, and then used the product, if you had any issues and you called our tech support line, there was a reason, in the early days, there was a reasonable good chance that my cell phone would ring. And that was not what I wanted, right? I didn't have the time to do that. I was running a services company, trying to run a product company as well. And so we made a very concerted effort from the very beginning to make the product as easy as possible to install and just use. Keep the learning curve really low so people just figured things out. If they picked up the phone and called us, it was as if there was a bug, right? Like, why did they feel the need to call us? How can we make sure that doesn't happen again in the future? Our competitors, by comparison, had some venture fundings, they had more money, they were targeting the upper end of the market, they had professional services teams, so their product would often take, say, 2 weeks to install with a person on site. And then when you need to do an upgrade, you'd have to get the person back out for maybe a week, and they have to retest everything. So that became a huge differentiator over time, because customers just saw our product and said, it's just so easy. It's so much easier to use. I don't need expensive people coming to help me. I don't have to pay extra fees. I can just do it myself. I have confidence that I can do that. So again, don't copy, our differentiator. Figure out what matters to you and where you can fit your product within that industry. Okay, next lesson learned. Really look at your team culture. In the early days, it doesn't matter too much, right? You're a founder, maybe 2 or 3 people on your team, got a couple of personalities, you figure out a way to work together, and it kind of works. But as you start growing that team, figuring out the team culture and having a say in that is going to be really important to allow you to scale the business. As a founder, you got into the business, you probably want it to be somewhere that you want to work, right? You don't want to start a business that you hate working at. So in the early days, you're probably going to make that desirable. But as you add more people, are they going to change the culture to what suits them? So you'd have to be very careful about how you're hiring, but you can't really do that if you haven't figured out what your culture is. So I'm not a big fan of mission statements. They tend to be, in my opinion, a little bit cheesy. Core values can be too, but core values, if they're done right, can work pretty well. So core values is just something you would sit with your team and figure out, what are the things that really matter to us. A lot of companies land up with very generic core values. So it's like, be honest or do the right thing, or, if you have to remind your team about integrity, I think you're probably going the wrong way. You probably shouldn't be on your core values. So it's just necessary to work with people. But look for things that really matter to you. So on the right here, I have Psychotic's core values from the early days. They've adapted a little bit in the last couple of years, but they're essentially still the same. But so we made them a little bit playful here so people might possibly remember them. We had this idea of always help everyone. So for us, teamwork was really, really important. And these core values came from being a small team of programmers that worked on very complex tasks and had to coordinate together. So if people were, out on vacation, we used to do things like pair programming, all that. So we had a lot of kind of team kumbaya, so that these things mattered a lot to us. So playing nicely with others, we couldn't really have any jerks on the team. Everyone had to be people you wanted to work with. And then looking at hard work, we were the underdog. So our main competitor was about 6 years ahead of us in terms of their R&D and sales, and we were playing catch up. So we just had to do more. We had to do more with what we had. We had to be smarter about it. So it made sense to have this idea it's gonna be tough, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna have to move a few mountains. And then the last one, we discovered this one. With programmers, if you want to retain them, and they're hard to retain, right? Your industry metric is usually about 2 to 3 years turnover for a programmer on your team. They're so in demand, and they're going to jump to something else. But what we learned at the time was that they really love learning. So if you can create an environment where programmers learn and improve all the time, and so we got that through, several mechanisms. Pair programming was one of them, but we had some goal programs and things like that. But by being able to have this idea of always getting better at what you do, that gave us incredible retention on our programming team, and these values translated to other parts of the business too. So sales and marketing adopted these same core values, and it gave us a tremendous advantage in the industry because our average retention of staff was just so much higher. So that's really the key here. Look for things that are going to help you in the industry, that are going to help your startup be more successful. Things that resonate with your own personality, maybe, like what are you good at, and what do you want to be surrounded by? What sort of attributes of people work best for your team? With one extra one I'll throw in here, if you come up with something and you put it in as one of your core values, and someone on your team violated that core value, if you wouldn't fire them for that, it's not a core value. So it's got to be things that really, really matter to you. So don't be generic, be really specific, and look for things that can give you an advantage in the marketplace. One thing I'll just point out as I'm going through here, the deck will be available after the presentation, but you'll see each of these links at the bottom here. This is from our Boost blog, which is the subscribe that we've been promoting during the conference. But each of these things that I'm tackling, there's a lot more detail and references to other sources. So if you're interested in, for example, building core values for your startup, definitely get the deck, go look at our blog post here, and watch some of the videos and some of the folks we recommend that talk more about this topic. Okay, down to our last lesson here. So know your limits. Figure out what you can and can't do. So if you're the CEO of your company, are you the right person? You might be the right person right now as a startup, but will you be the right person when you've done $1 million in revenue? Maybe you're the person that just likes to get things started and you don't really want to run with it, and you might need to have someone else take over later. Also think about it, we see the big figures like Jeff Bezos and folks like that take the company from zero to billions and billions. But I don't think that's actually that common. I think in a lot of companies, you swap out leadership at different levels. And so a company doing $5 million per year in revenue is very different than a $1 million. And then likewise, 10, 15, 20, each of those different milestones requires very different focus, different skill sets, that kind of thing. So if you're the person to do the whole ride and you're in it and ready for it, that's great. But just at least ask the question and think about where your limits are. A little Jim Collins quote here, but he talks about the people on the bus. So very important with your team, make sure that you have the right people on the bus, the people that should be on your team, and then that they're actually in the right place, right? Are they sitting in the right seat? And sometimes they're the right person, but they're in the wrong responsibility. So make sure you kind of, shuffle them around. And people, at all levels, the company may outgrow them. So someone might be in the right seat on the bus today, but as your company grows, it's just not the right place for them anymore. And that's okay. If you can't find the right seat, you part ways, they get to go do something, fun and exciting and something that suits them. So just be aware of this as your company grows. And you'll see this trend from folks that are generalists in the early days. So your startup founders, you wear a million hats, right? You can do everything. Talking to the lawyer, talking to an investor, and then talking to a customer, and then R&D in 10 minutes later. And your staff, your team members will be the same, right? They're wearing lots of hats and taking on lots of responsibility. As your revenue starts to grow, you're going to see less and less need for that, and you're going to see more and more specialists. So look at sales. In the early days, you maybe just have the salesperson, right? Generic title. Once you get to 10 million, you're going to have multiple different sales titles. They're going to have different territories. They might be channel focused, all different aspects to them, right? So you're really going to have specialists. And the folks that were generalists before may not enjoy being specialists. So something to be aware of with your team as things grow. And so for me, I experienced the same thing. I got to 10 million. I was really daunted at the prospect of having to deliver 15 million the next year. I realized that most of my day was spent with dealing with potential HR issues and really building a sales organization, which is not something that I'm necessarily very good at least certainly not at scale. And so I looked at myself and I said, I've definitely hit my limit here. I'm not the right person to take this business to the next step. And so when you're at that stage, you want to find, another partner to come in. Make sure that you get someone that is going to do the right thing for you. So for me, I looked around at several different VCs, interviewed them, did due diligence. I spoke to a lot of the founders that had sold their companies to them before, and did a phone call with them and chatted to them and understand well, how did that go? What did it feel like? And very importantly, would they choose to work with them again? And in fact, some of them had. They actually worked with some of the VCs again multiple times. That was very telling for me. So I was able to find the right growth equity firm for me that could then bring in the appropriate people we needed and make sure that we get to the next step. So I moved out of the CEO role in 2015 into the CTO role. And then steadily moved out of the business. I became part-time for a little while, and then in 2017, I stopped being an employee at my old startup, but I'm still fairly active with some of their tuck-in acquisitions and sitting on the board and that kind of stuff. But my role today makes a lot more sense in the business, to be more on the side and helping and guiding a little bit rather than being actively involved. So I added this slide in for anyone that's a fan of how I built this. My colleague Chris recommended I cover this. But they have a question they always ask at the end, like what part did luck play? And I think definitely, I was lucky. There were times where things went the right way. I can think, for example, very early in my career, attending a barbecue the one time where I met a neighbor who ended up giving me one of my first jobs in IT. Just fortunate, right? But it also, I was prepared and ready and impressed him obviously enough to get the job. So it's going to be a combination of the two. You got to be prepared, you got to do the work, and every now and then you'll get lucky. And the more you try at these things, the better your chances of success will be. I was trying to figure it out recently. I think of all the things I've tried, I probably failed at most of them, probably 80 to 90% of them. But that 10 to 20% where I succeeded, those are the ones, if you fail, you learn from it, but the ones where you succeed, you try to maximize those successes, right? So the classic saying, like fail fast or fail often, just never fail fatally. So if you're looking for more of this sort of advice, as I mentioned, join our subscription. It's these blog posts that cover all these sorts of topics for startup advice. If you're looking for these slides, it's logicboostlabs.com/events, and the slides are there with all the links to the blog posts as well. And open it up to questions.
Great session, Jonathan. I love how you threw in the last slide from how I built this with Guy Raz.